Some of the negative, uh-oh, I had to hit okay and now it left me. Okay, hold on one second. Some of the negative impacts is that a lot of the time screens can be used at high consumption for a lot of entertainment. And so kids are using it mainly for entertainment. And there's a lot of great educational programs. And so we don't talk about, I know people are like, I'm anti-screen time. And I mean, the reality is kids can't avoid screen time today, but we'll talk about ways that you can kind of introduce that to them. Low quality content. So making sure that the content they're watching is of higher quality, meaning the context of the quality, not like the high def, but more or less like what kind of language they're using, what kind of programs they're watching, what are they engaging in, how are the programs going to be useful for them and within their development. And so we'll look at some of that. Other negative impacts are that it interferes with their sleep. It can create distractibility and high distractibility. A lot of the times it will also create background noise, and background noise can impact kids in a lot of different ways. A lot of the times kids can use background noise to kind of as a safety and security, right? To always have that kind of noise on or TV in the background. That's what parents will say. Well, the TV's on, but it's kind of in the background. It's really not interfering with them. They're not even paying attention to it. But what happens is then they kind of depend on background noise for some like soothability. And so we want to kind of get them away from that using really, not that it's a bad thing. However, it can also impact creative play and imaginative play. So when kids are growing and developing and they're using their imagination, you know, did you ever watch a kid and something's on TV and they're just playing in their own little world and then they stop and they like stare at the TV? It's really interfering sometimes, and that can even impact their language development. So there's some correlation there as well. A lot of the times kids are left unattended with media and screen time. So many of the times kids are media and screen time are used to kind of calm kids down, or when the parents kind of just had enough. That's what happens. And many of the times kids are left unattended. And so kids can go on different, even with some locks, sometimes it's important to stay attended. And emotional dysregulation. So we talked a little bit about that within play, but it can also create emotional dysregulation within the systems, within the content. So sometimes the way that the content is set up, so loud flashing, music, scenes, constant distraction, that can create a little bit of emotional dysregulation, going from excitement to lows. And also, and we'll see a brief clip of this, but there's a lot of research that shows that there is an addictive component, right, which creates an emotional dysregulation, but high consumption of screen time impacts and lights the same neural pathways that cocaine does in the brain for kids. So it definitely has an addictive component. Media does have an impact on language. So many of you have seen some of that came out about Cocomelon. And then when my son was younger, it was Teletubbies. And it really does have an impact on language development. Many of these TV shows and games and activities that are on the phone or devices, sometimes they have characters that are kind of using a different voice, or a baby voice, or like, not really word formulating. And so that can impact language development, especially if adults are less interactive in that situation. So if we have a kid that has high exposure to some media and some of this programming that's not really language developing, and then they have low interaction with their parents, caregivers, or even one-on-one with other individuals, a lot of the times that will lower their language. And so we definitely want to make sure that parent involvement is a part of that. So what promotes language development? Naturally nurturing the language. So repeating or paraphrasing after kids when they say things. So repeating the appropriate verbalization. Like my daughter used to say hospital instead of hospital. And so you would just say, yeah, hospital. Instead of saying the inappropriate language, you just use the appropriate verbalization. You promote that positive language development anytime children are talking, really promoting that, not necessarily correcting it. Having language rich peers, so peers that talk a lot. I know that can be annoying for parents, but many of the times it's good for kids. Narrating daily activities. I tell parents this all the time. This is really important for language development. And many parents kind of feel weird, kind of describing what they're doing, but kids love it and babies love it. Even if you're talking to a baby, you're like, we're going into the changing room and we're going to lay you down, right? Just narrating everything just really helps soothe and regulate and helps them. It actually helps with safety and security because it's predictability. They know what's coming next. You're narrating their day. Now, the downfall to this is that they might expect that later on, but as they grow up and they develop, then they start narrating their day back. And so they start telling you what they're doing. So this is a really great tool. Labeling things. Mouth movement information also helps with language development. A lot of the times people have brought up to me about masks and how that can impact, but there's a lot of literature that also supports that kids start looking for other nonverbals. And that the amount of time that they are exposed to the mouth in the formation of words and language, that it does still impact their development. So impacts of media for infants and toddlers. They need to learn effectively from their environment. So required physical stimulation is important too. They need to experience real life challenges versus screen time. A lot of the times games and interactions, especially toddlers, they can get frustrated, but they need to kind of deal with that frustration and manage it. Many of the times parents are quick to say, oh, well, it's just a game, you'll be fine. It's really big in their life at that time. And so that's why they need a little more real life challenges and real life experiences. So even counting, we'll talk about this later on, but even with introducing some of the media plans, you want to bring sometimes some of that media into real life. So saying, if they're playing a counting game and maybe it's with oranges and then you're in the grocery store later on, you can say, look, here's some oranges like in your game you played, 1, 2. So then you're bringing it into real life. And so you're really helping them start to differentiate between the media and the real life and to see what that is and utilize those examples. Media exposure to screen time can create sleep disturbances if there's a lot of screen time. It's high stimulation, especially at night. And so we talk about bedtime routines and how important bedtime routines are, reducing some of that at least an hour before bed, and 30 minutes at the very least. Some of my parents are really reluctant to give up that TV or the background noise. And so we talk about at least 30 minutes so their brains can start to shut down. And even for kids who wake through the night, we talk about different activities and different things that they can do safely if they're not able to go back to sleep. Naturally, going back to sleep is our first goal. But if not, we have some kids that we've worked around doing different things that can help them create a more soft environment that will allow some sleepiness. But the minute they get on a screen, it's more high stimulation and they're most likely to stay awake longer. So we talk about alternative methods. A lot of the times it creates poor eating habits. Kids sometimes don't want to put down their screens or take their screens and tablets to the table. And what happens then is the same thing as, it's been age old that if you're watching TV while you're eating, you're more likely to eat more because you're not paying attention to what you're eating. And sometimes you're not having enough bites in between. And so there's a lot of literature that supports that this can create poor eating habits. Attention and focus all over the place. I don't know if you guys have, I don't have toddlers, but I have, I teach child development and language development. And one of the projects that I recently did with the students was to look at a TV program, and those those toddler programs are all over the place, even the educational ones. They're like, there's such bright flashing lights, and they go from one topic to another and I was like, I don't even know what's going on right now. So the attention and focus is kind of driven all over the place, which means that when there's lower stimulation, kids are going to have a harder time giving that attention and focus. And so, when you're having to read or sit down and pay attention to a teacher, makes it a little more difficult when you're used to all of that stimulation. And so it really does impact attention and focus. And it absolutely can create behavior concerns. I mean, we've all seen kids who are tantruming because they can't get a device, they can't have a device, or a device is being taken from them, or some sort of media. And so it definitely can create some behavior problems. In adolescence, the same thing, sleep disturbances, they also kind of need that brain shutdown. And for many adolescents, they kind of lose track of time when they're on there, and then they're not able to go to sleep or get enough sleep. It creates routine for low activity, so they enjoy the multimedia more than physical activity. And so it's low activity it can create behavior concerns, social engagement concerns. So a lot of the times adolescents would rather prefer to communicate through social media, and then they're missing more of that one-on-one. Metabolic syndrome, so it can create problems with sugar, being overweight, heart problems. So it can really lead to a lot of health concerns for adolescents. Okay, so this is the one we embedded. Oh no, I don't know if it's gonna work.
I can share mine and do it really quick if you'd like.
Do you want to?
Oh yeah, that's fine. Give me one moment.
I'm going to stop sharing. I think I have it up on YouTube too, if you don't. How come yours has a play button?
It should work.
See? Mine did when I was viewing it, and then it went to this. I told you it was weird. I couldn't. Oh, you did.
Yes, we did it.
Uh-oh, we lost sound. You muted.
Do you have it now?
Yeah.
Hold on.
So electronic screen syndrome is simply a way to describe what occurs when a child becomes chronically overstimulated from using electronics. So because electronics stress and overload the brain, the front part of the brain starts to shut down and the child becomes what we call dysregulated. So a dysregulated child has trouble regulating their level of arousal, modulating their mood, they have trouble sleeping deeply, and they can't tolerate any stress. So when a parent sees a child displaying these symptoms, regardless of any underlying diagnosis, if the child's using electronics, they should be suspecting electronic screen syndrome. So interactive screen time refers to any kind of activity where the user is actually interfacing with the device. So video gaming, texting, computer use, using an iPad, those are interactive screen activities. Passive screen time is just things like watching television or movies. So many parents already try to limit their children's passive screen time, but when it comes to interactive screen time, they think that because the child's brain is engaged, that it's not harmful. But in fact, the opposite is true. As it turns out, interactive screen time is more addicting, and it's also more likely to cause sleep issues, problems concentrating, and irritability. An electronic fast is a 3 to 4 week period of complete abstinence from electronics. So in this day and age, because children get so much screen time, sometimes when parents just try to cut back or moderate, it's not enough, and the child is still dysregulated, they're still rubbed up, it's just not enough. But what an electronic fast does is it gives the brain several week period of deep rest, which allows the body clock to reset, it allows hormones to regulate, stress hormones lower, and the child feels better and functions better. At the same time, it can clarify diagnosis. So a lot of kids these days are being misdiagnosed with things like ADHD and bipolar disorder because that's what they look like. So anytime a parent is even contemplating trying a medication with a child, they should always try the electronic fast first, because at the bare minimum, it's going to minimize any need for medication, and it might even eliminate the need.
Okay, you can stop it there. So that's
Consider the effects of electricity.
So that's Victoria Dunkley, and she actually wrote a book called Resetting Your Child's Brain. And it's a really fantastic book. And just like she went through the electronic fasting, that's one method and one way to kind of start to reduce that screen time and exposure. And the whole book like lays it out. So it's a really nice tool for parents. It's a really nice tool for providers, and to read along with parents and to help parents with that. So she does a really great job of explaining that. Okay. So I think I'm on this one. Okay. Wait, maybe not. Sorry. I'm trying. Okay. Okay. Oh, it won't let me move though. Oh, there we go. So these are provided. I provided these the last time. These are off of CDC's website, but they're in the PowerPoint. So when it is shared with you, you're welcome to print these off. These are for parents. I give these to parents. It talks about the different ages and screen time versus lean time. So what like the current averages that kids should be or are on the screen, and then how long they should be on the screen, and then some alternatives. And believe it or not, I know this sounds really simple, but believe it or not, you know, I just had a family in my office the other day that said, what else is there for them to do? What can I help them do? And so really just coming up with a list with the family of the interests can be helpful, or coming up with some of these can remind them of some things that kids can do or alternatives that they can suggest for kids. Like I said, it seems really simple, but when you have some families that have utilized screen time for entertainment, interaction, kind of childcare at times, it's really hard to shift. So being sensitive of that is going to be really important. And different ages have different expectations. So teens and cell phone use, a lot of the times I get asked a lot of these questions, and there is a correlation in cell phone use and the uptick in anxiety, depression, and even suicide. Cell phone use has led to a lot more bullying and exposure to bullying. So there's a lot of virtual bullying that goes on. And it's mean. I don't know if any of you have teens, but some kids can be mean and harsh on there. Like I think of when I was younger, and if some of these things were like said to me, like I would be like devastated. And, you know, I talk to my daughter about it all the time because she seems so unfazed by some of it. And so like, to me, that's a red flag. Like we need to check in with your emotions, because that should be hurtful. Like that should have hurt your feelings. And so we talk about that because I think today it's just kind of a norm, and it does lead to, especially for kids with higher risk factors, right? So kids with some protective factors may not have such an impact, but kids with risk factors who don't have a supportive environment, who are experiencing already anxiety and depression, you know, being exposed to some of this can really kind of set them over the edge and lead to more suicidal tendencies. It can also impact moods. So that cell phone and media can impact moods and create irritability, just like it does with younger kids with behaviors. But for teens, it's more of moods. A lot of the teen content have teens who use, you know, explicit language. And so making sure you're monitoring that, because that can impact moods and shift. I had a family that talked about when their kid would get on the phone and then they would come in and talk to them, they would use the same language occurring on the phone, and they don't typically talk like that. And so we talked about the need to reduce that exposure and for the kid to gain awareness of that. Awareness is really important. And of course, texting and driving. So the more cell phone use they're used to and they're interacting with, then it can lead to texting and driving, which we all know can be very dangerous for teenagers who are already distractible. So we want to limit that. how to identify if it's a problem with a teenager. Are teens using their phones to avoid emotions or connection, right? So avoiding that one-on-one connection and using it for that connection explicitly, especially since COVID, we want to make sure that we're trying to get that one-on-one personal interaction so that kids can build the communication and emotional literacy with one another face-to-face versus through the phone. Is the phone a barrier for those interactions? Is the phone taking away from teenagers sleeping better? So constantly like checking their phone. It's really important for teens to probably shut their phones off when they're going to sleep or turn it on, the do not disturb app that they have. That way, or not app, but it's the notification, so that they're not disturbed, so it does not impact their sleep. Because there is an addiction, right? There's a small stimulation in the brain. Well, it starts small, but it can end up big. The minute they hear some of those notifications, they want to check it, and that definitely will interfere with their sleep. Is the phone being checked at school? Is it interfering with grades? Is it interfering with their ability to pay attention? So making sure that, and it's unfortunate, but in high school, a lot of the times kids are permitted to use their phones or have their phones or check their phones. So it does become a distractibility. Do your teens' mood become more irritable when the phone's removed or when they get on the phone a lot, right? So looking at that mood and irritability level is important. Some tips and tricks. Don't look at your phone for the first 15 minutes of waking up. Think of you as an adult, right? We'll go over a slide about modeling, but think of as an adult. That's sometimes the first thing we do. That's the first thing I do. I check my phone. I look over my emails, before I even get out of bed. And so thinking about that as an addicting component, identify if it's an impulse. Identify if it is an impulse to check your phone or if you need to. Have your phone away during travel. So when you're driving, put it completely away. Like I'll put it in my middle console to reduce some of the temptation to check it. Set aside an hour during the day to be phone free, to just put your phone down, silence or turn your phone off 1 hour before bedtime. Walk with your phone in a bag, not in your hand. How many people do we see like walking around with your phone in your hand? And not to have your phone at the dinner tables. So try not to have your phone. And I know that's a rule in my household. There's no phones at the dinner table. I remember one time, I think I might have shared this with you guys last time, but I remember one time my son was in college and we met with him and a friend after their ball game and we took them out to dinner and his friend was on the phone the whole time, like during dinner. Like I wanted to have a conversation and get to know this kid and like he's on the phone the whole time. So afterwards I told my son, I said, I better never see you on the phone like that the entire time at a dinner table. That is so rude and disrespectful. And he was like, Mom, you're seriously yelling at me for him. I know, but that's just so rude. Do you see how rude that can be? And look, he's like, yeah. He's like, I don't use my phone at the dinner table. I'm like, okay, good. If that's the truth, who knows? Music versus screen time. So this is really big for teens too. And this is one of the things that we try to compensate when working with teens. I work with little ones for the most, but some of my teenagers, what we would do is try to compensate their frustration with losing some of that screen time with music. So using music more of a coping strategy than screen time, because some teens do identify screen time as a coping strategy to kind of escape or distract some thoughts. So we talk about using music instead because it doesn't have the same impact. It doesn't interfere with learning and it can relax versus stimulate. And so that's something that we're looking for. So the American Academy of Pediatrics advises parental involvement at all ages and all levels, but the guideline is for children over 2 to have no more than 2 hours a day. And so when I talk to parents, they're like, oh, I don't know that we can get it down to 2 hours. But like the book in Resetting Your Child's Brain, it talks about ways to kind of bring them down to that. And so maybe not right away, maybe not right off the bat, but a lot of the times working our way down to that 2 hours. There is a lot of supportive media for kids. There's a lot of educational pieces, and anything that works with shapes, colors, reads with them, right? That they can look at the words and read can be really helpful. Smart boards that can be engaging back and forth, educational. Again, it's still considered screen time. It's still considered media, but it is helpful and it is supportive and educational. Sorting numbers, shapes, matching, those are all really helpful. You want to avoid anything that's really loud, fast moving, all kind of colors, explicit language, right? And even a lot of the, the programming today will say that it's educational and here's how it's educational, right? But you still watch it and they still have a lot of different colors and fast moving and a lot of music. And I watched a program one time that talked about the way that they market towards young kids is by identifying like the primary colors, what they enjoy, how long when they're activated to that color will it stimulate them. And so it's really amazing how marketing works to get the kids kind of stimulated towards that way. So it's really up to parents to monitor that and us to teach parents on how to monitor that, because sometimes they really have no clue how to do that. Okay. So I'm going to try to play this video. Maybe. Oh, it's missing the button too.
You want me to? I think that will work on my end for you, Amanda.
I'm going to try. Well, let me. Yeah. Okay. I'll let you play it.
Just let me know when to stop.
So many of us, myself included, keep it real, have spent too much time this past year in the digital space, whether it's Zoom calls for school or work or to catch up with loved ones, or maybe even binging on our favorite shows during lockdowns. We are all watching screens a lot more. But what is all of this screen time doing to our brains? And could the impacts be long lasting, especially for kids? ABC's Rena Roy reports.
These days, screen time seems to be all the time. Nonstop stimulation in an infinite virtual playground.
Hey, how you doing, man? Everything has been kind of transformed to this 2D world. Our brains on screens is an addiction.
The most susceptible among us, kids. 11-year-old Ayan Mukherjee got his first computer when he began remote learning last spring.
Let's just start from the beginning. Let's go back to April 2020 when virtual learning began. You got your very first laptop. What was that like?
I mean, it was very exciting because I usually had to share devices with people in my family.
But he says in just a matter of days, things were getting out of hand.
I started with a couple of videos, then I started watching more and more. I watched every free moment I had, and day and night.
And it turns out our brains are wired to keep watching. Binging activates the reward center found in the midbrain, where dopamine is released and sent to our nucleus accumbens in the basal ganglia. It taps into the more survival and pleasure-based centers of the brain, driving us to watch that next episode or just one more video from a creator we love on YouTube. The prefrontal cortex of the brain, more recently evolved in humans, is more rational and works to weigh the consequences of certain decisions like binging. It might step in to tell the brain that you need sleep, so you should probably turn that video off. It's a constant battle between immediate pleasure and self-control, making us pretty exhausted. Dr. Heather Berlin, a neuroscientist and clinical psychologist, says it's taking a toll, particularly on kids.
Studies show that with children, the longer amount of time they spend on screens, the worse their social and emotional development.
Ayan's mother, Dr. Preetika Mukherjee, is a neuropsychologist herself and tells us she noticed an immediate shift in his behavior, saying he was extra tired, moody, and irritable.
And as a mom, during that shift, how did it feel to see your son kind of acting out in this way? It was hard. It
was difficult because he's usually not this dysregulated. He's a very even-keeled, calm kid. We were questioning what could it be. According to the Mayo Clinic, excessive screen time in kids has been linked to loss of social skills, behavioral problems, less sleep or irregular sleep, obesity, and even violence. Lindsay Reckler, a mother of two, has been working and parenting from home like millions of Americans for over a year now.
When you're fully plugged in, you lose a little bit of sense of boundaries. You really just ends up immersed in this screen of images and work.
She's had to balance her own screen time as a busy director at an investment bank with that of her young children learning from home.
We went from don't take mom and dad's iPad to here's your own, and taking that iPad away after that virtual session is over proved to be very difficult.
Especially as the internet became their vital link to the outside world.
They went from interacting with every day, going to the playground, seeing their friends, to just pure isolation in our home.
Dr. Berlin says that in person, our brains subconsciously pick up on cues like body language and touch to help us respond appropriately in social settings. But on platforms like Zoom, these cues are missed, and the brain adjusts to a digital world of disrupted conversations, exaggerated expressions, and a lack of eye contact. This is not how we were evolved to communicate, causing what's now being dubbed Zoom fatigue. Professor Jeremy Valenson has been leading Stanford University's research on the subject.
Zoom fatigue is when you've been doing for hours a day, you get this kind of exhaustion, you feel drained, you feel exhausted, perhaps more than you would after meetings around people in the real world.
All the kids from your class on Zoom.
Reckler captured our new reality in a parody children's book called Good Morning Zoom, a riff on Goodnight Moon.
When I first wrote the book, we were trying to explain to our children why they were not seeing their grandparents. Here, all of these children are enduring this unbelievably terrifying experience together.
Scientists say our intimacy with loved ones is really suffering. One surprisingly important thing our brains are missing out on is smell. It's the only sense that can go straight from sensory receptors directly to the cortex, the primary sensory area of the brain, making it especially powerful and informative. Smell is also linked to empathy.
I find so interesting and fascinating is just the idea of smell and that being such a big part of the way that we interact with other humans. We're getting information from people in terms of odors about emotions, about how they're feeling, and we're losing out on a lot of that. It's making us less connected in certain ways.
It's a dizzying combination of effects on the human mind, and the long-term impact of all this zooming is still a mystery.
We don't know the answer, but we are working pretty hard to figure it out.
For now, there are ways we can limit the impact.
Okay, you can stop it there.
ION has taken all devices.
All right. So what do you guys think of that before I continue with the rest? What do you think of that video? Any thoughts? Anything come to mind? Did it put everybody to sleep at this noon hour? Anybody?
In a way, I felt like it was pretty comforting to like sort of see that other people are feeling the same way with the Zoom fatigue. I'm sort of like secretly wishing a solar flare just takes out the whole digital infrastructure and we go back to just only in person everything. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I love the ability to just do things from anywhere. But yeah, it makes sense because I sort of crave seeing people in person, but then I'm always like, we'll Zoom literally like in our offices right across the hall because it's convenient for a share screen. But like, yeah, just having that connection. And then also that smell receptor, that was really interesting.
Yeah, Anastasia. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Anastasia, do you have two screens now?
Yes.
So, because I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I noticed because you're looking into one and you're talking to another, right? And that is definitely a contributor to Zoom fatigue, right? You have so much when you're in person with somebody, it's just natural to have that connection and discussion. But when we're on Zoom, we have to figure out where our camera is and where our audience is and who we're talking to and what we're doing, right? And that takes a lot more energy. So Zoom fatigue is real, and there's a lot around that. So I'm glad that you were able to relate with that, because it is something that happens. And yes, the sense piece was huge for me too. I was like, that makes so much sense. Like, if you think about it, like, people have certain smells, and like, it's almost comforting at times. And it's almost nice to get around those people and think about, like, did you ever hear somebody talk about like their grandma smelling like cookies? I mean, my grandma never smelled like cookies, but my grandma definitely had her own smell. But some people say like, my grandma smelled like cookies. And it's like, yeah, like when you get around that person, it's just, it's almost comforting, and it builds that empathy, right? And if you think, pay attention to it the next time, your best friend, a grandma, or someone real nurturing, just the sense and then your body response, it's pretty amazing. So yeah, that's a really big piece. Anything else?
Dr. Swagger did right. Always a wonderful presentation, Amanda. I've heard this before, but always learn something, and it resonates with me each time on how important it is.
Thanks. Just love seeing your face, Dr. Swagger. Anybody else? Yeah, so I think that this video really hits about the brain and how hardwired we are, and just taking that into consideration, right? And even ourselves. I know for me, like, Netflix is a thing. Like, I'm not a real big TV watcher. My husband is, and he won't watch Netflix with me because he says it does something to you. You just can't stop watching. Like, you binge one after another. He's like, I hate watching series with you because you can't wait for me. And I was like, I know, I don't know what's wrong with me. All right, so let me share my screen again. So there are things that we can do and ways that we can kind of manage it. One, we can create safe cyber citizens. So making sure that we know what our kids know, like, what do they know about media and screen times, and what do they identify as screens? That's an interesting thing to explore with kids. So just sitting down and when we're doing these approaches and setting some of these cyber plans up, we want to do it at a time where a kid has not lost a device, right? They're not emotionally elevated. Just kind of just a time where we set up where everybody's kind of soothed out and feeling okay. No major events have occurred, and just kind of develop this, explore this, and see how they feel and what they think and what they know, right? What words can they use? Understanding permanency and what they put out there. And privacy, especially with the older ones, right? Understanding what they put out there is permanent. You can't get that back. How it can impact them, how it can impact others. Unfortunately, we have to talk about, being careful with pictures and what we're wearing and how we look and how that can be viewed by others and what we accept from others. Now, kids can get in trouble just for sending things. Kids can get in trouble for accepting things. And so making sure that they're aware of those things. Understanding privacy and respecting each other's privacy, and making sure that we're keeping things private, right? Your address, your number, not giving these things out, not having these things relevant on pictures. I posted my daughter's first day of school. She's out there waiting for the bus, and I take a picture and I posted it on Facebook, and my sister called me and she said, really? She said, you put a picture out there with your home address and a picture of your daughter on it? I was like, what are you talking about? So I looked, and for school, she had to wear, they had to wear this big thing that said, my name is Addison Newhouse and I live at, whatever it is. I was like, oh my goodness. I said, you like zoomed in on that? I would have never seen that. And she said, you have to be careful. And so my sister is so on top of it. So I know my kids can't get away with it very much. Develop a social media plan. So develop those expectations together. What are your expectations as families? And sometimes parents are like, I don't even know what my expectations are. sit down and start thinking about them with the kids, right? They have you can kind of explore where they're at, what their thoughts are, and reel them in. So set some of those very clear guidelines. Make sure it's age appropriate options, and staying engaged, making sure that they know you're going to check up on them, that you're going to stay engaged. You shouldn't be getting off the phone when you come in. Expect them to manipulate the situation. That's their jobs. Kids are expected to manipulate. And reduce incentivizing with media or screen time. Now, I know you have to find something that is motivating for kids, and many of the times that is something that's motivating. And if that is something, I mean, I work with behaviors because I work with little kids, and many of the times we'll start off with that and then move towards other items. But if that's really the only motivating factor, sometimes we do have to use that. So, but just trying to stay away from that as an incentive. These are some media plans. We're going to go over them. Screen Sense, Common Sense Media, P-AIMS, and PBS. So E-AIMS is engaging. So staying engaged as a parent, not just putting, limits on it or securities and then not staying engaged, sit down with them, see what they're looking at. Let them know that you're going to pop in every now and then. You're going to look through their phones or their game systems or their computer histories. So make them aware of that. Activity, make sure that there's an activity that is stimulating for them educationally that you can bring into reality. Stay involved, meaningful, make sure it's meaningful use so that there's a purpose to it, right? And if it is entertainment, reducing that and looking at a smaller window of entertainment pieces and higher educational and social. So making sure that they're remaining social outside of that media exposure. Screen Sense. So Screen Sense talks about limiting screen time, how to limit screen time, avoid background noises, remove screens from the bedroom. So talking about kids not even having TV screens in their bedroom, choosing the right age appropriate content, having more of an interactive experience back and forth, involving others, whether it's a sibling, a parent, whatever, but maybe a game that can involve everybody. So having some of that, connecting to daily activities, again, like counting the oranges, or my daughter has an app where if she completes a chore, she can go on there and she gets a little, like a little trophy or token, and that's stimulating. And sometimes those pieces are addicting, but we're still connecting it to a daily activity. We're connecting it to reality for her. So it pulls away a little bit. Be creative during video chats. Include others, make sure that your video chats can be interactive. Sometimes, I work with parents a lot of the times on video chats and how to create those, especially over the pandemic, having the same books to read back and forth to one another, read aloud, show the pages. Puppets are great for video chats and screen time, and toys, coloring something, drawing things. Those are really beneficial, especially when you have kids that are apart and kids that are young. They don't want to sit on the phone and talk. And so many of the times, if they have separated parents that they can't see, if they're in foster parent or if their grandparents are separated, and they're allowed that screen time. So setting something up so it's more successful for them. Remembering that as a parent and reminding parents that they need to be good role models, right? They need to reduce their background noise. Sometimes they're the ones that need it. Their phones can be a distraction for them and reduce their interactive time with their children. So making sure that they're kind of reflecting on their own screen use and screen time. I had some parents that came in talking about their child's screen time and reducing it and how difficult it was. And then when we talked about their own screen time, they had a really difficult time. They set up their goal to put their phones like in the bowl as soon as they walk in the door, and they had a really difficult time with it. But once they did, it actually increased their interaction with their child, and their child wanted to be with them more versus their screen. And so it was interesting to kind of see that the tables turn. Each day of our lives, we make a deposit in the memory banks of our children. So making sure that it is something worthwhile and interactive, and just paying attention to our own screen use. And then there's references. Any questions, comments?
Don't be shy. Well, I think you did a wonderful job. It's such an important topic because as we continue going to the future, that's technology keeps, being more and more part of our daily lives and who we are. So I think finding that balance is essential. And it was eye-opening for myself as well, because I'm very guilty of, being on my screen till I go to bed and watching TV till I go to sleep and playing video games till like 2 a.m. So
Yeah.
it's
my total new addiction is TikTok. I could, like, once you start watching some of those videos, you can't stop, right?
I haven't even let myself get it because I know I have like an addictive personality with that stuff. So I haven't even let myself go there. But no, it's so important, especially with the kids growing up. So it's a great presentation. Thank you. Anybody else?
I just wanted to add, I have 2 teenagers of my own, and just the last few years from starting school on Zoom, everything going, to Zoom, even soccer practice at one point was on Zoom, which was super weird. I've watched it like change with them and how they've just gotten so wrapped up, and recently relocating here from, out of state, we've allowed more time because we've allowed that social interaction. So it's been really hard now this summer to pull them away. So this really is this was so helpful for me. So thank you so much. And I got some great ideas to take home to use.
Yeah, I'm glad. But yeah, that's a really good point, right? Like, I think sometimes we want them to connect, and many of the times, again, kids manipulate. So they'll be like, well, don't you want me to talk to my friends? Or, and so, I mean, my daughter broke her knee. So, she's in bed all the time. And so when I've been really reducing her screen time, but when she first came home from the hospital, she was in so much pain. I was like, you can be on the phone as long as you want. And now I'm totally regretting that. I'm like, you need to get off the phone. So it's hard. It's hard to reverse that. But I think it's a really good point, that you can reverse it, you can reduce that, but it's up to parents and to teach parents those guidelines, and it's important, and it's not always bad, right? So we just kind of monitor it, we stay involved and we stay active, and that's really important. That's an important part of parenting across the board. And so screen time is definitely one of those pieces, but also remembering that we're models. And I think a lot of people, I think it has shifted a lot with texting and driving, but that was a big piece at one point, right? Because kids learn from our behaviors. And if you're a parent that texts and drives, guess what? You're going to have a kid that texts and drives. And so I think we've learned our lesson with that, because there's been so many unfortunate accidents, but hopefully, that stays true.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, we gave it the good Zoom pause. So hard for me to be silent. I think you all know that by now. All right, so I'll just make the final announcement and I'll get those slides to you. And I have embedded those videos, so they should work okay. Again, thank you, Amanda. And then our next one will be August 3rd. And Dr. Lauren Swagger will be discussing child psychiatry and emergency. So we look forward to that. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.